I'm Matt Reynolds, and this is my podcast.
I can do the job, but running the business is quite difficult. What a lot of tradesmen lack, and I was probably one of them, is business skills.
I don't mind making mistakes. You learn from your mistakes.
Information is all around you in the minds of people that work beside you.
Welcome back to the Trench Talk podcast. I'm Matt Reynolds. I'm a plumber, and today I sat down with Tom Crampton, a cybersecurity expert at the helm of his own company, Trusted Impact. The idea of these discussions, for those of you joining us for the first time, is to go into the trenches of achievement and talk not with people who are orchestrating from some lofty perspective, but to those high performers who are actually in the trenches, honing their craft. That has included guests from the worlds of business, sport, and entertainment, all of whom are on the front lines doing amazing things. For the past decade, Tom has been helping some of Australia's biggest and most well-known companies protect their digital information and remain secure online. As a consulting firm, Tom and his team work regularly as hackers to first expose business weak points before then helping them implement solutions, plug holes, shore up and protect their most valuable information. Tom's clients include the Australian Government, World Vision, Victoria Police, Clarke Rubber, McMillan Shakespeare, Rinnai, the University of Melbourne, IOOF, AWB, Telstra, Oxfam, and many, many more. In our chat, we covered how to protect yourself online, the psychology of cyber criminals, how and why they target who they do, the fastest way viruses spread over the internet, including how to avoid them, how Tom uses the Pineapple, a digital intercepting device, to grab sensitive information out of thin air, and how to create a password and where to store it. You can find Tom and more information about his company, Trusted Impact, at his website, trustedimpact.com.au. Enjoy my chat with Tom Crampton. Tom Crampton, thanks for doing this.
My pleasure, Matt.
We're in your St Kilda Road offices this morning in Melbourne here. Thank you for having me in. Now, me as a regular, everyday, average person going about my business, standard day-to-day stuff, am I really at risk of or under threat of becoming a victim of cybercrime?
Yeah, look, Matt, in these days when everybody's going digital, the internet is important to them. They transact their business. Even small organizations are transacting their business on the internet. Oftentimes they have apps or various other tools and things to be able to help them do what they do on an everyday basis. And unfortunately, when you're connected electronically, that means a lot of people have access to the electronic, digital kinds of assets that you have. So what do I mean by that? There's 3.8 billion people on the internet, which is great because you have a big audience to sell to talk to communicate with. But if 1 out of 100, just one person out of 100 wanted to do something malicious or typically not personal, they just want to make money off of your data, that's bigger than the entire population of Australia alone. So it's easy to forget or not think about those numbers. 3.8 billion, okay, it's a big number. But if you really think about it, 1 out of 100 is still a really big number.
So for someone like me personally, what are they targeting? What can they take from me? What's valuable?
There's unfortunately a lot of creativity when it comes to the criminals. There on one end is the very sophisticated, and it's easy to talk about really cool, neat, kind of trendy kinds of things called nation-state threats, of where the good guys and the bad guys are constantly trying to infiltrate each other. That would be, for example, the US, the UK, Israel, Australia on the good side, I'd like to believe.
Yeah.
And adversaries on the other side. North Korea's recently been recognized as having, strangely enough, here's a country that doesn't have much internet, but is considered to be growing considerably in their cyber threat capability.
And but recently you've got the US and Russia with their election, which is a big cyber discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's on one end of the scale. And frankly, at the end of the day, anybody can get anything with enough time, money, and motivation. So that's kind of off of the scale. They typically, a nation doesn't care about us. They don't particularly care about you.
As an individual.
As an individual, correct. Or as a small business, typically.
Yep.
And yet, on the other end of the scale is a lot of just low-skilled people trying to monetize your data, trying to somehow be able to either take the information that you have that they can try to monetize, get money out of, or do things like lock up your computer and hold it for ransom for $300, $500 so that they can go after the masses and get lots of money that way.
So at that really basic level, $300, $500 ransoms, that actually happens?
Well, you wouldn't believe how prevalent that is.
Oh, I haven't heard of it on that lower level, if that's the right way of putting it.
Yeah. In the last 6 months, 3 in particular, there have been these 3 real waves that went across the world of this ransomware, so software that is malicious stuff.
Yes.
That if and when downloaded will encrypt your hard drive and hold it for ransom until you pay in Bitcoin, of all things.
Of course.
We can go off on a tangent in that conversation. But what do I mean by that? A thing called WannaCry, WANNACRY, was the name of a program that within 24 hours, just one day, hit across about, and I'm going to probably get these numbers somewhat wrong, but order of magnitude, I think it was 260,000 computers in a number of countries. I think the number was over 100, 125, 126 countries. So within a short period of time, it was infecting most of those computers around the world if they weren't maintained and up to date for the current software patch. So we, Australia, woke up to the news of where this started in the Northern Hemisphere and started to migrate across the world, infecting machines that were not up to date because it was able to exploit these things, lock up computers, things like that you wouldn't really even anticipate. Maybe an electronic sign is walking down the street. You see this locked up page that says, "Oops, you've just been encrypted. Here's how you pay us money." They ended up actually purportedly not getting a lot of money from that, but those things are a wave of the future. And there was 2 subsequent infections that went around the world, and it's caused, for example, there's a large shipping company that estimates that they've lost $100 million because all of their computers were locked up and continued to be locked up, and it would perpetuate itself across their networks.
Oh, yeah. So does that spread through email? How does it get from one machine to the next?
Typically, the biggest way that happens is through an email of some sort.
Okay.
You typically get something that looks to be legitimate. It could be from Australia Post. It could be, I saw one from a local retail company. Again, it was the address, for example, for yourself. Maybe it's Matt at, something that's, secure dash MR, when I remember your address, but you can add little bits and pieces that look like it looks like it's your address, and oftentimes that can even be spoofed, but it looks very similar to your address. It looks like it comes from you. So I think, hey, I know Matt, must be fine. He says, hey, look at this file that I found, or hey, Tom, look at this thing, make sure you click on the link. So you're thinking everything's fine. You click on this link, it executes a program that goes through and encrypts your hard drive.
As long as someone has your email address, if I've got this right, there's nothing to actually stop anyone sending something there, right?
That's correct.
So it becomes up to you at your end to filter your inbox and see what you're going to click on.
And that's what makes it really difficult because you really now have to look at every email and wonder, is this thing legitimate? Now, oftentimes it doesn't just show up. You typically have to click on a file and an attachment that will then do something to your computer.
Okay, so the actual opening of the email is usually safe.
Is usually safe.
Okay, and then the attachment is what brings you the issues.
That's correct.
So protection on that front is just before you open anything or click on anything, you want to make sure, I guess, does this make sense is this something that Tom would regularly send to me? Or does this look a bit off? Actually, I got one within the last week through Facebook Messenger. One of my friends or someone I'm friends with, I should say, who I don't communicate really a lot, but he sent me this, hey, check this thing out. And it just looked that's a bit too close for me.
It's funny you say that because that happened to two of my friends on Facebook.
Oh, within the last week?
Within the last week.
Yeah, so then a couple of days ago, you get a message, oh, if you've seen this from me, ignore it, and all these ones start clicking up. And I'm assuming it's because someone in the network has clicked on it, sent it to everybody else, they've clicked on it, and it goes like that.
That's right. In that particular situation, I think it was somebody trying to get exposure for buying things. So there's everything from I just want to try to sell you things, and I've found from past a lot of the Facebooky kinds of things are someone just trying to sell you things. But you never know whether that's on that end of the scale, which is annoyance, to I've done something pretty significant to my computer that I don't know how to fix.
So the hackers, these people, if you like, they're after everything from exposure to ultimately money.
Ultimately, typically all about money. We're trying to maybe, at the end game, it's about trying to get money from you somehow, some way, either holding you for ransom or knowing enough about Matt that I can do things like maybe submit a tax form and get my taxes from you. I get the money, you don't. You sit there and say, I've submitted my tax, and they go, sorry, we've already sent it off. Or a small loan or something like that. And that's a whole another category of things called PII, personally identifying information. So knowing enough about Matt, and it could be his birth date, it could be enough information to be able to impersonate Matt when it isn't Matt.
I actually read about one recently where somebody went to submit their tax return, as you just said, and then got a note back saying, not required, you've already submitted and we've already paid your refund.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah, but it wasn't, obviously. Someone else had taken the money. Mm. Now, your company, Trusted Impact, you work a little bit bigger than just the personal level, if you like. Tell me, what do you do?
We've been around now for over 10 years, which is really hard to believe because time really flies when you're having fun. So we're in consulting. We provide advice, insight, guidance to our clients as opposed to selling them firewalls and technology or running systems. But it's just around providing counsel and insight to large organizations to small organizations, commercial organizations to government organizations. And it's a whole gamut of at the top end of kinds of work that we do is health checks or strategy. Company will come to us and say, look, we've got a big IT program. We've got our business that takes credit cards. We capture lots of information. Maybe it's health information, so on and so forth. And we don't really know what this thing called security is, and we don't really have dedicated resources. Can you tell us where we start? Where do we get the first 3 steps, 5 steps? Don't give us the whole thing because that's difficult to do. But give us the first insight as to where our biggest gaps and holes may be and help us address those. If we go even further, down on the other end of the scale is a lot of very technical work. A term that we use in the industry is called penetration testing or pen testing, and that's what broadly is considered to be what they call ethical hacking. We're really fortunate to have some brilliant guys who know how to hack systems. And so a company will engage us and say, we've just developed this great new web application or something along the lines. Can you guys test it to make sure that before we release it to the 3.8 billion people that I referred to before, release it to the internet, that it won't be easily exposed to being exploited? And we're fortunate to have tested everything from iOS apps, Android apps, through to a company's internal network, the Wi-Fi, web applications, and even in the space of utilities and organizations that have these large networks of pipes or power or things like that, things what they call SCADA systems or PLC, and it's what controls water flows or electricity flows to make sure the bad guys can't turn the flow the wrong way or make bad things happen.
So we've seen, there's a number of movies now built on these sort of, shut off the city's power supply and all that sort of stuff. So all that technology, if it's not now, it's certainly in the process of being moved to digitally controlled. So that becomes very important to protect, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. Spot on.
So does it depend on the company that you're working with where you start? I assume that it would. And where typically do you start? Is it that trying to penetrate what they already have? You go searching for those holes. Is that how it works?
As you allude to, we don't think one size fits all. So on one end of the scale, we've worked with a couple of really interesting, innovative companies that are online businesses. One in particular was basically, I'll call it Uber for transportation, for couriering packages and the like. Their business was all about providing a connection between couriers and people who needed things moved. Their business all online, and they were taking information from those couriers and the people that needed a courier had some sensitive information. It was about customer lists, courier lists, and so on. The kind of challenges they had were more of a technical nature. Who has access to this data and who might be able to gain by getting access to the data and protecting against that? I'll give you a contrast to that. Was we were working for an electric utility, and their challenge is they have depots all around the place. They have a large contractor workforce, so not their own employees. So they don't know whether it's Matt or Tom that's showing up to this depot tomorrow. And one of their challenges was what they basically said was, come in, plug into our depot, and see what you can get access to, because we don't want that contractor that we don't even know who their name is to come in, plug in, spend as much time as they want to try to get into their important networks or their corporate networks, but there were enough things in place to protect against that. So range of challenges.
Are you talking about, so inside the company, you may not want your service technicians, as an example, getting access to your accounting information,
Spot on.
Even though they might not be hackers, because then you've got issues, just thinking out aloud here, that if the service technician loses the phone or whatever, you don't want the wrong person to pick that up who can get straight into your accounting system. And you're saying that those problems on a big scale, big companies, those doors are open in some of them, in some of the cases that you've seen.
We do thousands of these things, as I said, called penetration tests, and it's not often that we find an organization that's secured against very simple kinds of things. And it is hard. It's difficult because you have to know what's there. You have to really understand where every bit and piece of your network is and be able to keep those systems up to date. If a company's 10, 20, 30, 50 years old, they have a lot of old stuff in the field, and even understanding where it is and what versions it's at is a job in its own right. And one of the easiest way to exploit something is an unmaintained, unpatched is the term, computer that has old software that you know how to compromise it through a known exploit. And so you're right. It is complex because first question is what do you have and where is it and what are the potential vulnerabilities?
Do you get called in after the hack has happened?
We do. We get called in a proactive way, but also a reactive way. Something's gone wrong. How deep did they get? I can think of a recent project where something started to go awry. One in particular, they got a call from a third party. They got a call from their internet service provider that says, what are you guys doing? The amount of traffic that you are generating has spiked greater than what you've ever done. What's going on?
So the service provider picked that up, like your Telstra or your whatever? Not the company. Yeah,
correct.
Got it, yeah.
So this was a health services provider.
Okay.
So they very quickly unplugged things and said, what happened?
Yep.
Interesting part about it was when you do the forensics of what actually occurred was the data that we could ascertain, the facts that we knew, were that somewhere probably about 6 to 9 months prior, someone from what appeared to be a location in Europe had uploaded a file. The interesting part about it's a different country in Europe, IP address, an address in a different place, logged on to also look around. So the hypothesis was, I've built this program that can help exploit something. I've sold it to you. You've implemented it into this. You've exploited this and put it in this rural health services organization. And what you were doing was, frankly, just conducting what they call a phishing attack. It was under one of the large four banks. You'd get an email to 10,000. I think the address that these were sent was 80,000 email addresses were all sent, as you often will get, an email that says, oh, your account at X bank has been locked up. Please click here to unlock your bank account. So you're thinking, oh, well, this is a legitimate address, right? It's a legitimate bank. I do bank at this bank. So I'll click here and I'll log on with my credentials and unlock my bank account. Well, in the meantime, it's all fictitious. You've just given them your username and password for the bank, and now they've got gold. They can go after your bank account. They can try to transfer that as quickly as possible. So back to what I was saying is the first perpetrator was somebody who had uploaded this and was trying to initiate this attack. The other person, who we believe probably was the developer of the application that they'd uploaded, was just checking on his licenses. Oh, so they've exposed this. Let me see what else there might be. And all to an organization which, frankly, didn't worry much about those kinds of things. It was due to an old system that they hadn't maintained, unpatched. And, they're finding ways to exploit your systems, either just to initiate attacks. Because why would they do that to your computer? Is when somebody finds out where it's emanating from, they'll come after you to lock that down. Well, I don't want to do it from my house. If I'm gonna do something illegal, you don't do it from your house. You get into somebody else's house to do it. And that was the idea of them uploading this to somebody else. Let them initiate the attack. That way it looks as if it's coming from that organization, not who the real bad guy is.
So every computer has, and let me try and explain this in very simple terms.
Yeah, it's hard.
Every computer has an IP address, right, which is effectively, I think it's like a series of numbers that's your identification on the internet.
Correct.
So if you do something online with the right equipment, the right skill, the right knowledge, you can go back to the source of where that came from and track what's being done. If I got that right.
To 98% of the world, that's correct.
So then what a hacker or someone who's trying to exploit that system will do is hide that.
Correct.
Change, reconfigure it. I think they can use like different browsers sometimes and like
they'll hide
networks
their tracks.
And they'll hide their tracks. Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Also, they can't, in a traditional robbery scenario, no one can find them and they can do it again, right?
Absolutely.
So how would I know if I've been infiltrated, hacked? Because I watch the hacking movies and I kind of like a bit of that stuff. It's great viewing. And then your mouse flickers on your screen, maybe
your webcam goes off.
Yeah, any of those. I mean, is that something to be worried about? I've seen on a computer that the TeamViewer application will randomly launch. Are these all things that you should be concerned about, worried about, keep an eye on?
Absolutely. I can think of another client, and I'll just bring it to life a little bit. I was the CEO of a pretty large listed organization that, as he told us, he could see the cursor moving on his computer, and he wasn't touching the mouse. So their first indication was, why is my cursor moving, and why does it appear to be clicking through things? After an evaluation, a bit of a review and so on, basically our guy could sit in the parking lot of one of their factories, just sitting in his car, be able to get into the Wi-Fi, because the Wi-Fi, as you know, goes out a little bit, so you can sit in the parking lot without being really seen.
Yep.
You're sitting in your car and you've hacked into the Wi-Fi because it's pretty easy to do. You've gotten into that plant system and then hopped over to the corporate headquarters. And in the corporate headquarters,
like a CEO would sit at home and log into their
somewhat
business.
Very similar.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So they had nothing in the middle between their Wi-Fi and their corporate shared drive. So our tester, very smart individual, was able to, sitting in a parking lot, have access to the same kinds of things. So imagine your hard drive, the shared drive of folders. And there were folders like strategy, reorganization. To be honest, we got access to people's long-term incentive plans, short-term incentive plans, and employment letters, all those kinds of things that you just normally think, hey, this is not a problem. It's on our shared drive in our company. What could go wrong? Well, when somebody on the outside has access to it, and their kind of business would expose them to some pretty advanced individuals who would want to have that access. And just off on a tangent, we actually find, back to your question, do people know? That's really hard to detect whether something bad is going on the inside, particularly if I have your username and your password. It looks like you're just an employee doing your work. And so it's difficult. And most companies, I would find from our experience, are just now starting to try to put in tools to be able to look inside of the organization and see whether there's activity that's just strange. Like a customer service rep has never accessed more than maybe 10 records a day, and next thing you know, there's been 10,000 records being accessed. Why is that?
Yep.
Having those interesting questions that says what's normal and what's abnormal, I would roughly say that even those companies that spend a lot of money, there's probably only about 20% that would have a good visibility of what happens on the inside of their technology network.
So actually know what's going on inside their business, which in any other aspect of a business, you'd think that was crazy, right, to not know what's going on. But because you can't see it, I guess you don't think about it, so it can happen, go undetected, and all. A
great analogy, Matt, is think about a retail store. You walk into Chadstone. You walk into a retail store, and there will typically be closed-circuit TV. You'll see that there's a couple of cameras watching who's doing what. There's a clerk. There's a clerk at a checkout stand, and maybe that shirt that you're buying has a tag on it that sets off an alarm when you walk out without paying for it. So all these traditional ways that we over the last century have put in these simple ways to make sure that people don't walk out of your store without paying for things. But when you think about it electronically, a lot of companies have a store on the internet, and the simple question that says, do you know who's in your store? Number one, do you know where they're from? Do you know what they're doing? And are they walking out with things that,
they shouldn't be.
They shouldn't be. And because it's electronic and it's digital, it's this hard thing to get your brain around. Retail stores, they've had it down pat for a long time, and they still lose things. Electronic stores are still struggling with having similar analogies of those kinds of things in place.
Is equipment important? Type of computer, type of phone, that sort of thing? Or is it more a software thing within that device?
Probably a little bit of both to be able to certainly from a hardware standpoint, but I would say that's much less significant than it's really about the software.
Okay.
And maintaining. It's depressing to see the statistics when things like that global virus, this thing called WannaCry and Petya and non-Petya, all these strange names for these big global viruses, are attacking systems that are just old and outdated. There's a local hospital that had the pathology department effectively fall over, not be able to communicate, because it was running an operating system called Windows XP. You might remember XP. There was XP, and then I think there was 7, and there have been a couple of versions of 8, and now there's 10. Well, they're operating with XP, which has been out of support for probably 2 to 3 years. And so Microsoft isn't even maintaining it. So known vulnerabilities are there and available and easily exploited. And they, for a long period of time, the pathology department couldn't tell the emergency room results of even what Matt's blood test was, and those things electronically. They'd have to go back and forth. And so it obviously had a big impact to their ability to provide good care for people in the emergency room. And as a function of that, we then helped the broader health industry of trying to put things into place to begin to lift their game when it comes to security.
Could you think about maybe the blood test of, say, you and I are probably not that important to whoever's going to be trying to hack us. But if you think about some of the more important people in society, prime ministers, presidents, heads of companies, these sort of things, they all have their medical records on databases somewhere, right? So if someone can get access to those and know, they might have some condition or be anaphylactic or whatever, then that is another area that then could be exploited in terms of harming them if you want to look at it from that sort of malicious angle.
You're both spot on and correct, but let me pull you up on your example because I think it's a brilliant way to bring to life. In our world, when it comes to cybersecurity, there are three things to worry about. And it's a strange acronym because you will remember it because it's not the CIA, as you can tell from my accent, it's not an American spook organization, but CIA stands for confidentiality, C. The I is integrity, and the A is availability. And so what do I mean? When we talk about the great example of a blood test, is that confidential? No, not confidential. Your bank account, that's pretty confidential. Your credit card number, confidential. If you have maybe health issues that you don't want out, maybe that is confidential. But there are the other aspects called integrity. So if you're, and I'm going to get the blood types wrong, but if you're an A+, if somebody gets that wrong and try to give you a blood transfusion with the wrong kind of blood, that can have a really severe health outcome. So integrity makes sure that what the value isn't changed inappropriately. Hospital infusion pumps are all network connected. And if you get my dilution of whatever medicine that I have off by a decimal point, I could be dead. Your blood test. Give me one type of blood when I'm a different type of blood and maybe not able to deal with that other type of blood. It could be my health. Availability was the example that I was using about the hospital that pathology couldn't give results. If availability means I need this information at a particular time, when your computer's locked up with ransomware, that's availability. I can't get access to it. So when you think about security, any of your listeners, even when thinking about their small businesses, the questions typically are, what do I have that's confidential that I should put off to the side and make sure nobody has access to it? But then also thinking about what happens if the numbers were wrong, the integrity side of things, and availability. I use that example of the company that's the courier transportation. If they're not online, it's like shutting your front door. So they'll go out of business if they're not online for a week or more. So it's thinking through that CIA.
So the equipment is not quite as important as keeping your software up to date?
That's correct.
What are your thoughts on using cloud storage, Dropbox, iCloud, keeping your photos in the air?
Yeah.
Is it safe? Should you use it? Is it safer than having it on your own computer? What should we be thinking about with those scenarios?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not an easy answer.
Okay.
So a lot of smaller organizations always found it tough to maintain their own computers, keep them up to date. Frankly, it wasn't what they did on a normal basis. And so going to the cloud can be a great thing for them because the cloud provider oftentimes will be doing that for them. And so there's a lot of real great advantages by going to the cloud. But there's, like anything else, there's some risks. If you were to share something with me on Dropbox and I forward that on to somebody else, they have access to that same folder.
Oh, so that'd be like the share email that you share a folder. So they could just forward that email on, and that's where you could have a problem where that could be forwarded to 100 people.
That's right.
By accident, even.
By accident.
Yeah.
A lot of things happen by accident. When we keep our eyes on a lot of industry statistics, and somewhere up to the range of 25 to 50% of large data breaches are done through just simple accidental negligence. I didn't know. I sent out a spreadsheet that had 5, 6 hidden columns to it that I didn't know were hidden, and it actually has all your details or other information like that. So It's that thinking again about the CIA. What do I have that's confidential? What am I just thinking about the possibility of what might go wrong?
So it seems like it makes sense that you need to, even if you don't know, the ins and outs of all the workings, it would be beneficial if you had a bit of an understanding of how this thing all works, like a helicopter view, if you like. Because if I equate it to something like driving a car as an example, you don't necessarily need to know how the engine works specifically, but it probably is beneficial to know that if the engine starts coughing and splattering and that sort of thing, that you probably should pull over, have a look under the hood, or call somebody who can come and do that for you, right? So would it be important, in your opinion, to have that overall view, to have a bit of this broad understanding?
It is. I think you're spot on, Matt. Let's use that analogy a little bit further. You probably wouldn't drive around without a seatbelt on. Now, 20 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, you would.
Yep.
I remember as a kid, back of the station wagon, we're all rolling. I had three older brothers. We're all rolling around in the back of the station wagon and, run into something or hit the brakes really fast, and we're projectiles to the front seat. So there are things like you know that if you're speeding, you're going to be at the risk of maybe having an accident, particularly if you have an old car and say the suspension is gone or the brakes aren't very good and it doesn't have airbags. And so that's a similar analogy, which is if you maintain the latest software and keep those up to date, it's kind of like having a new car that's got the airbags, that's got ABS, and so on. And if you're driving a 1970 something, there's a good chance that that's a bit riskier than if you were to have a new car with a lot of those protections in it.
Wi-Fi. Everywhere's got Wi-Fi. A local cafe, buses, even planes now in this country are starting to come in. Is it safe? What should you do on it? Should you trust it?
I think that the simplest answer to that is no, don't trust it.
Okay.
Full stop. But we all live by Wi-Fi, so that's impractical. You typically need to use Wi-Fi for various reasons, whether it be personal or business. You typically need Wi-Fi. Just literally this last week or so, it's come out that even what we as an industry would consider would be secure Wi-Fi has been proven not to be secure. A thing called crack, K-R-A-C-K. And it's a long conversation just in that alone. But typically, if there's a difference between Wi-Fi with a password and open Wi-Fi. But there are tools. You can get on the internet and buy for $99 the Wi-Fi Pineapple. Strange name, weird little tool. It's no bigger than your iPhone. You can sit there and intercept a signal. It will, one, tell your iPhone that it is that last place that was open Wi-Fi. It's me, connect to me, and somebody not thinking about that will connect to it. Okay. And all they're doing is capturing the traffic between your phone and where you're headed and the information between the two. So simple rules of thumb, don't do any banking on open Wi-Fi. Use the cell phone connection if you're going to do it on your phone, but don't do it on somebody's open free Wi-Fi because they can capture things like what you're doing. Sometimes, depending upon the technical aspects of it, they could be capturing your username and password and be able to access those things just like you do. So $99 and you've got that in a bit of technical nous, then you're okay.
Do you own one, Tom?
We do. I mean, it's stuff that we do. We'll help clients evaluate their Wi-Fi, and they're strange, weird, wonderful things that you can do that, you can set up what they call a rogue access point, and you name it, the SSID, the name of the Wi-Fi router that's close or similar to the legitimate one, and it'll say, yes, connect to me. They put their password and username in, and we can capture that and try to crack that. So it gets a bit complex, but Wi-Fi has its risks.
What about hotspotting from your phone in that out of the office, out of the home environment? Is that a safer way to go about it? Like not actually using on your mobile, but you know what I'm talking about, using that as the modem?
Yeah. No, I think that there's certain controls. I mean, when you look at the hotspotting, there's typically a pretty good password on that you have to put in. So if you've got my computer sitting next to my phone, you have to actually put that password on there. And so it's mostly going to be protected from the computer to the phone if you're going across the telco lines as opposed to, 3G, 4G, as opposed to an open Wi-Fi, then that does a pretty good job to contain it.
So it's a much safer way of going about business that, let's face it, we all have to do anyway. So
absolutely.
You want to do it the safest way. Now, you mentioned cameras before in a normal, or traditional, I should say, retail environment that have been around for forever, and security cameras and the like. So I was in an office the other day, and we're going through some web stuff and some marketing stuff and strategies and that sort of thing. So I opened up my laptop, and the guy who I was working with, and we're going through some stuff, said, Mark Zuckerberg, pointing at my laptop. I said, what are you talking about? He said, the tape over your
I knew that's
camera.
What you were going to say.
And I didn't know what he was talking about, but apparently there's this interview that's online where Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook was being interviewed by somebody, and he opened up his laptop to show something during the interview, and there was a piece of tape over the camera. And the interviewer asked, if you're worried about this sort of stuff, should we all be worried about this sort of stuff? Apparently the answer was yes. So is that true? Should we be worried about our webcams on both our phones, mobile, and in a home or laptop environment?
Phones less so. Laptop environment, short answer, yes. Longer answer is somebody that gets hold of my webcam, if they really want to see me typing away at my computer, well, good luck to you, because it's pretty boring.
Yep.
There are a lot of better things to do than seeing what I'm doing on my computer, just in terms of my face. But you're right. I mean, I learned from the really smart technical guys that we have in the company that when they have stickers across their webcams, I know I should have a sticker across my webcam. What it means, though, is that is easily exploited. There are ways to get you to download and get access to see things, and there are always, as you said in the movies, ways where somebody's watching somebody doing something inappropriate on their because their computer is open in the bedroom or something like that.
Yep.
It does exist. It can happen. It isn't difficult to do. So a piece of tape might help. If you're doing things on your webcam that you don't want others to know about, then it's probably a good idea.
Cheap insurance, if nothing else, right?
Absolutely.
And what about voice? Are we at that point yet? Because we're doing more and more stuff with voice searching that on our phones. Is recording what we say around our phones, is that a thing? I've heard that Google records this and stores it. Is it true? Is it a concern? Should we be worried?
Back when I was talking about the confidentiality, integrity, and availability, so if what you're saying is really important stuff that is confidential, then you should be worried about that and think about whether there are things that might be recording and so on. I would say for 99% of the normal person, you and I, if somebody wanted to listen to all my voice conversations, they'd fall asleep before they found anything of value.
Yeah.
So there's kind of a there's a pendulum that swings. You can get to the point where you're paranoid and concerned that everybody's watching, listening, and doing. But frankly, I'm a pretty boring person and don't do a lot of really critical, important kind of things, such that typically the bad guys will go after big bang, easy targets. So instead of trying to say, for example, monitor Matt for a period of weeks to try to find something, it's probably easier for me to go after a database of 10,000, 50,000 credit cards and be able to do that easier and monetize that in a bigger scale than it would be to really try to go after the normal person. There are examples of where that happens, but fortunately, touch wood, it's more of the exception than the rule.
So on a personal level, if you've got a reasonably modern computer, you keep your software up to date, you're careful when you're sharing Dropbox links or Google Drive stuff or whatever, you have a reasonably 1 or 2 year old iPhone or mobile phone of some description, and again, keep it up to date, then and be wary of anything suspicious, that puts you in a much more unlikely to be
One
victim.
more thing I would add to that great list. brilliant list, fantastic way to summarize it. The other thing is it's that boring topic that everybody always harps on about that is difficult to do, but it's about passwords. If it's important, call it important, meaning your bank account, your online banking. Put a very complex password on it, uppercase, lowercase, numbers, certain symbols like the hash and star and so on. Do that and only use it for that one thing alone. Strange as it may sound, I oftentimes advise write it in a tiny little book and put that book somewhere safe and out of the way that nobody else knows about. And the reason why I say that was, why should you worry? People reuse their passwords. I reuse passwords. I would never reuse my banking password for anything else. Why would I worry about that? Couple of good stories. LinkedIn. You're familiar with LinkedIn?
Yeah, certainly am.
A lot of people use their important password for LinkedIn. Well, they had a data breach in 2012 and 2014. Most security companies have access to this database, and frankly, all the bad guys have access to the database too. So they have every user on LinkedIn, which you would imagine is millions of people, and by now they have a vast majority of those passwords known and identified. They've gone through to be able to confirm that, in fact, the password is this. So we're often engaged by a client to say, come in electronically and see whether or not you could get access, prove to us you can get access to our share drive or the data that we have or an application we have. And one of the easiest ways we do that, you go straight to the LinkedIn database. You look up star.star wildcard. So, anybody who's at ourclient.com.au, you suddenly see typically 10, 20, 30 people with their username and password. Just use that username and password for their company systems. And it was only about a year ago that we had an organization in Sydney we were doing this to, and within 15 minutes we had one of the IT persons full access to all of their systems just because they reused a 2014 password for LinkedIn for the company systems. Reuse happens too often, way too often.
You didn't get it from LinkedIn because it wouldn't display that, right?
Correct. So they got hacked by the bad guys.
Oh, LinkedIn did, and that's
LinkedIn.
Okay, got it. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there's a prequel.
So they
Yeah,
got the database of usernames and passwords, and that's the gold for them.
Yes.
Because now they have potential access to a whole bunch of different individuals, sensitive systems. And I'll bring that to life again with a personal, small little friend of ours. Small little example of where a woman, divorcee, she was a recipient of a pretty good divorce settlement. She was using Hotmail. So just fictitious name, Susie Jones at hotmail.com. Oftentimes your email becomes your username. And because she was reusing her passwords, somewhere along her trails, she reused the same password for something dodgy, some little site that nobody was protecting. And let's just say the password was XYZ. So Susie Jones at hotmail.com, XYZ. What does a bad guy do? They get access to, here's a username. They actually logged on to her Hotmail because same username as Susie Jones at hotmail.com.
And where you're going to find the passwords of every other thing that you do is in your inbox somewhere normally.
Well, so she put, whoever they were, put in XYZ. Mm-hmm. And next thing you know, they're reading her email just like she would.
Yep.
So they had access to everything, all of her emails, and you think, oh, who cares? She was investing a fair amount of money with 2 financial investment firms, and they had access to her monthly statements. So they knew how much they were investing for her. And because she was also using that email for things like making travel requests and booking tickets and so on, when she was out of the country, as she was traveling with her daughter, she was out of the country. Next thing you know, 2 financial advisors get an email from her saying, in this particular example, hey, Cam, as you know, I'm overseas. So now you're legitimate. Cam knows
you're overseas.
Yep. They're overseas.
He knows you and your situation.
Absolutely. And I've just found a property that I'm really excited about. I'm going to buy a property, and I think they were using England. I need to put a 50% down payment on it. I'll email you shortly, but I need you to transfer this money. So they haven't just come on and said, hey, transfer the money here, but they've just hooked Cam to say, I'm overseas. Yes, that's legitimate. And I'm going to need your help, and I'm going to need this money. Okay, this is good. I'll send you the account pretty soon. And by the time they sent the account, fortunately, in this case, Cam was pretty cluey. Cam was one of those cluey individuals that said, it just kind of smells a little bit wrong. I'm going to need you to sign a couple of things. And fortunately, she didn't lose the $50,000 that they were looking to transfer out, but she was a lucky one. The amount of time that's happening in the last year, there's a thing where a lot of scams have been going on where a CEO of a company sends a fictitious email to someone in accounts payable. We've got a big deal going on. I need you to transfer $150,000, $250,000. The amount of times I hear this story in the last 12 months, I would say it's at least several times a month where somebody says, we received one of those emails. Looked like it came from the CEO or someone of very seniority to someone in kind of the accounting department saying, transfer the money here. They put an account that is their account. Money gets transferred. Somebody says, oh, how did that go? Or I made that transfer. And only after somebody calls up and says, well, we didn't get the money, a supplier who calls up the accounts payable that says, we never got that money. And the company goes, oh, you sent us an email that said you were updating your financial banking account details. We sent it to that bank account. And suddenly it's the bad guy's bank account. So they're getting quite clever.
And you could see in the example you used, Susie and Cam, that was a one-off, bit unusual, so he picked it up. But in a company situation where that scenario could happen every other day, a couple of times a week or whatever, that's less likely to trigger a, hang on a second, let's just pick up the phone and call someone and check on this sort of stuff. So going back to the password thing, should we think about passwords in terms of different levels? I mean, because everybody wants your email address and a password, right? You buy vitamins, online shopping or whatever. So on those sites that you're doing everyday stuff, you want to have that completely separate to anything that is, quote, important or of high value.
I'd be a hypocrite to say I don't do a similar kind of a thing, but it does get into the gray zone as to what you consider to be one of the importance versus not important. There are programs. Off the top of my head, there's a thing called KeePass, KeePass. KeePass, that is a little program that you can store all of those passwords, and you can say put in a unique one for this site, and that's typically a good thing to consider. That's probably the new school way of doing it, and you've got a password on that password manager that is very complex and nobody else can get access to. The old school was just that little book, and you write down at this web address, this is the password I use, and you put it somewhere safe.
Yep.
What I mean by that is instead of it being exposed to 3.8 billion users, they have to get into your house. They have to know where it is. They have to find it and know how to exploit it. And that takes it down to a pretty small, much smaller number than all of the people on the internet.
Which is completely reversed from 30 years ago, right? Because back then you'd want to put stuff online because it's safe. And now you're saying, I think the term's called, if I got this right, cold storage, where it's completely unplugged. Have you heard of that?
I haven't, no.
Yeah, but maybe I've got it wrong. But this term cold storage, where you write stuff down on paper, doesn't go online, and you keep stuff unplugged, sensitive files and that, not to use a cloud or Dropbox, Google Drive sort of arrangement, but to actually keep the thing unplugged.
I love the name.
Only plug. You can use that. There you go.
Thank you. It's they're certainly reusing that. But there's a term that is sometimes used in the industry called air-gapped network, air-gapped, which means nothing in the middle, totally disconnected. In a lot of the really sensitive nation-state kind of secrets, nothing important is ever connected to the internet. There's an air gap between this computer over on the right-hand side and anything internet to the left-hand side, and that is a good simple way of, as you said, cold storage. Keep it either on paper or not connected.
Is there anything else that you can think of from a small business personal angle that we should consider?
It's easy to get scared when you talk to people like me.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we do. I believe in the power of technology, and look what it's done. It's so exciting, the fact that we can now transact with the rest of the world as if everybody's next door. And there's some really fantastic things that we shouldn't shy away from the technology, but we should make sure, though, that our eyes are wide open. We've thought about it. Considered the confidentiality or integrity or availability of the information. Because fortunately, so far, and it will get worse over time, but so far, the normal person listening to this, like myself, doesn't have a lot at risk, but they do need to think about it.
And particularly if you follow a few of those tips, you put yourself in that category that it's a lot more difficult to access, steal from, or whatever. So
Well,
I suppose criminals are just like most of us, right? And we tend to go for the low-hanging fruit when it's available. So you just don't want to be.
Don't be the low-hanging fruit.
Don't be the low-hanging.
There's the old kind of joke that really isn't that funny. But let's say the three of us, or just the two of us, are in the forest, and a big bear comes running after us. You don't have to be the fastest. You just don't want to be the slowest. So a similar analogy is you don't want to be the slow, fat rabbit that gets eaten by the bad guys.
Yeah.
Start running.
Yeah. Second slowest is okay. For you, just a few more questions, Tom, we'll wrap up. But for you, in terms of your business, trusted impact, where you're going, 10 years, if you click your fingers and have it all done, where are you looking to be? Where are you taking the business?
Yeah, today we do advice, insight, and guidance to help companies, and typically companies help improve, kind of not be that slow fat rabbit that I just talked about. How do they move along a path that's a long journey? But I think ultimately, as organizations realize how complex things are, they're going to want to have somebody to be able to do it all. Give the insight, help them with the technology, implement the technology, manage those systems on their behalf with that whole end-to-end view. So that's really something that we're looking hard to do. First, by partnering with those kinds of organizations and working closely and collaboratively with. And who knows, over time, whether or not our ability to pull that together, because it is hard and organizations need help. They really just want not 20 people to help them in different bits and pieces, but help them with the problem. Doesn't mean they won't ever get hacked, but it means that they'll have people who do it on a full-time basis, typically more skilled, and have a greater strength at doing so.
Should you have a contingency plan for when it does happen?
Absolutely. It's interesting you asked that. So I would say 3 to 5 years ago, the general attitude was we won't get hacked, won't happen to us. These days, it's not a question of if. The question is when, particularly if it's coming to an organization. And if you're getting larger, the probability is even greater. There's the CEO and chairman of a company called Cisco that does all the switches and routers, a big, massive international company. And the chairman would sit there and say there are two kinds of companies, those that have been hacked and those who don't yet know that they've been hacked. And that's real. That was 2 years ago when he said that. So back to the point, I guess, where is it going to be in 10 years? It will only get worse. And should you be worried about it? Yeah, it's something that should be on your mind.
What computer do you use on an everyday basis?
I use a Dell.
So nothing unusual?
Frankly, I have just a normal computer. To be honest with you, as you would imagine, I have several, and our guys who are the smart ones. Let's say I'm just a village idiot. I just ask stupid questions. But the smart ones, I'll have 3, 4, 5 of them.
It's my job here. Silly questions. And they're all using standard stuff as well. It's just how you use those standard machines.
Spot on.
Do you have any advice for, this is more a business question, young men, women just starting out who are looking to grow a successful career and business for themselves? Any advice, anything they should be doing, focusing on?
Oh, look, number one, if you follow your passion, other things will follow. Don't try to get the role that you think will be the highest paying, the best perks. follow what you enjoy doing, and everything else will follow. It's really one of the things that we did when we started the business 10 years ago was a recognition that life's short and you're going to spend a lot of time working. And wouldn't it be great if your hobby or something you're really interested into is what you're able to do as a business? Suddenly work isn't work. It's not hard or hard work. It becomes something you enjoy doing. So number one, find what you enjoy doing, and that's always a long journey. It took me a long time. But don't hesitate to just take a crack and find something that people need, they want, they're willing to pay for it. It's really simple stuff that we often forget. Do something that people need, that helps people, that can help them solve issues that they have, and the rest will take care of itself.
A question I ask everybody: if you could have one law changed, what would it be?
One law changed. When it comes to starting smaller businesses and so on, I think there's a lot that can be done to help facilitate that. I mean, the power of the country and its economy is not the massive company that has momentum that will employ tens of thousands of people. Those are important. Those are great. But the power of this company are the small subject matter experts, those like the plumbers of the world, the tradies of the world, the chippies of the world that go out and do really good work. And that's what fuels the economy. So we oftentimes think about facilitating the big companies and maintaining industries like the vehicle industry for a long period of time with subsidies, when I think, there's really the power of the economy that is those small to medium organizations that are small, nimble, and do good work that we should help support a little bit more. And that would be everything from taxes through to investments and venture capital and those kinds of things, funding ideas and thoughts and not keeping old ideas alive.
Incentives for young entrepreneurs and business people. That's not the first time that exact thing has come up on this podcast. That's interesting. Do you have any favourite books or documentaries that you recommend?
Read voraciously. There is no one book that, it's like mentors and leaders that I've seen in the world, locally and internationally. There isn't one that you say, I really want to be like Susie or John or whoever. But there's attributes that, one, seek those mentors, i.e. read all those books that you can, because each one will have a perspective that helps fill in a little gap that you've got or help you build out you as an individual, both those strengths and those weaknesses you have. Wouldn't follow in one person's footsteps, but get those that are around you to give their perspectives. And I know from my experience, I'll consider very good mentors that I've had along the way. And you may not say that they're the greatest person in the world, but geez, they're great at A or B, 1, 2, 3 things. And you want to take those attributes, make them your own, and same with 3, 4, 5 individuals. So always seek to ask the questions and take those that align to your weaknesses.
Well, look, Tom, is there anything you want to add before we wrap up?
No, look, it's been a delight, and it's always fun talking about the topic, so thank you for asking.
I'm going to let you get back to your day. Thank you so much for this and allowing me to come in and record it, one of our what's sort of become a regular catch-up now. So I always appreciate your time and for doing this, and thanks, Tom.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Matt.
Hey everybody, it's Matt again. Thanks for listening. Just a couple of things before you guys clock off. You can get all Trench Talk episodes at xrm.com.au/podcast. You can also sign up for other goodies at the same site. Just plonk your email in there and you are covered. That's X for X-ray, R for Romeo, M for Mike.com.au/podcast. If you really like what I'm bringing you, please head to iTunes, subscribe to this show and leave a review right there. And lastly, if you want to contact me directly, type the @ symbol followed by Mr. Matt Reynolds into your search bar and you'll find all the social links. Goodbye.